A significant development is quietly unfolding in West Africa. It did not arrive with fanfare. There were no dramatic press conferences, no loud celebrations. But make no mistake, this moment matters. India has entered into a major gold purchase agreement with Burkina Faso. At first glance, it may seem like a routine trade deal. Gold for capital, resources for partnership. But beneath the surface, this agreement signals something far bigger. Burkina Faso, a nation long viewed through the lens of instability and poverty, is now repositioning itself as a strategic player. And at the center of this shift stands President Ibrahim Traoré. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso has taken a bold step, choosing to engage directly with India rather than relying solely on traditional Western channels. For decades, African gold has flowed outward with little control over pricing, processing, or long-term benefit. That pattern is now being questioned. India's involvement changes the equation. As one of the world's largest consumers of gold, India brings not only purchasing power, but political weight. This deal strengthens India's access to raw gold, while offering Burkina Faso an alternative path, one based on bilateral cooperation rather than dependency. And this is precisely why the deal is drawing attention far beyond Africa and South Asia. In Washington, concerns are quietly growing. The United States has long maintained economic and strategic influence in resource-rich African nations, but this agreement suggests that influence is no longer uncontested. African governments are exploring new partnerships, new power centers, new rules. This is not just about gold. It is about sovereignty, about control over natural wealth, and about who gets to decide Africa's economic future. For Burkina Faso, the message is clear. Its resources are no longer open by default. They are negotiated, strategic, and leveraged with intention. For India, this deal strengthens its global resource security and deepens its footprint in Africa at a critical time. And for the world, it signals a subtle but meaningful shift, one where African nations are no longer passive suppliers, but active decision makers in the global economy. Sometimes history doesn't announce itself loudly. Sometimes it moves quietly through a single deal that changes everything. Burkina Faso is one of Africa's most important gold-producing countries. Beneath its soil lies vast mineral wealth, resources that should have been a foundation for national growth and stability. Yet for decades, that promise remained largely unfulfilled. Much of Burkina Faso's gold industry has been dominated by foreign companies. Extraction happened on a massive scale, but the economic benefits flowing back to local communities were limited. Profits moved outward. Decisions were made elsewhere, and the country that owned the gold often saw only a fraction of its true value. This imbalance has long been a source of frustration. The new agreement with India marks a clear departure from that pattern. By allowing India to purchase gold directly from Burkina Faso, the deal reduces dependence on intermediaries and external corporate control. It places the government in a stronger negotiating position with more influence over pricing, volumes, and long-term planning. For Burkina Faso, this could mean increased national revenue, more predictable income, and greater ability to reinvest gold earnings into infrastructure, public services, and economic development. But the importance of this deal goes beyond numbers. It represents a shift in mindset. Rather than exporting raw wealth under unfavorable terms, Burkina Faso is asserting greater ownership over its resources. The country is signaling that its gold is not just a commodity, it is a strategic asset. For India, the agreement offers a reliable supply of gold and deeper engagement with Africa's resource economy. It strengthens trade ties while supporting a model of direct government-to-government cooperation. And together, both nations are challenging an old system, one where African resources were extracted, priced, and controlled from afar. This deal matters because it is not just about gold. It is about fairness, about agency, and about a resource-rich nation finally claiming a stronger voice in how its wealth shapes its future. Since coming to power, President Ibrahim Traoré has made one priority unmistakably clear: Burkina Faso must regain control over its natural resources. For years, decisions about the country's wealth were shaped by outside interests, mining contracts, export routes, pricing power. Much of it existed beyond national control. Under Traoré's leadership, that approach is being challenged. The gold agreement with India reflects this new policy direction. It is not an isolated transaction, but a strategic choice, one that places national interest at the center of economic decision-making. Rather than relying exclusively on traditional Western partners, the administration is actively seeking alternatives, partnerships that offer balance, flexibility, and long-term benefit. Officials close to the government describe the move as part of a broader effort to diversify Burkina Faso's international relationships. The goal is clear: reduce dependence on any single power bloc and expand room to maneuver on the global stage. This does not mean rejecting existing partners outright. It means reshaping the terms of engagement. For President Traoré, natural resources are not merely exports. They are instruments of sovereignty, tools for rebuilding economic strength, and symbols of national independence. By engaging with India, a major global economy outside the traditional Western sphere, Burkina Faso signals that its future partnerships will be guided by strategic alignment, not historical habit. The message is subtle but firm. Burkina Faso is no longer content with passive participation in global markets. It intends to negotiate, to choose, and to decide how its wealth is used. In this context, the gold deal is more than an agreement. It is a statement of intent, one that reflects a leadership determined to redefine the country's place in the world. India's interest in this agreement is neither sudden nor symbolic. It is strategic. India is one of the world's largest consumers of gold. The metal plays a dual role as a store of value supporting financial stability and as a critical input for industry, technology, and manufacturing. Ensuring reliable access to gold is therefore a national priority. Under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, India has steadily expanded its engagement with African nations, not through rhetoric alone, but through trade agreements, infrastructure cooperation, and long-term resource partnerships. Africa is increasingly viewed in New Delhi not as a distant market, but as a strategic partner in India's global rise. The agreement with Burkina Faso fits squarely within this vision. By purchasing gold directly from a producing nation, India reduces exposure to supply disruptions and volatile global intermediaries. It strengthens resource security while building government-to-government relationships based on mutual benefit. This approach also aligns with India's broader push to diversify its sources of critical materials. Rather than relying heavily on a narrow group of suppliers, India is spreading risk across regions, partnerships, and political systems. For New Delhi, the deal is about more than securing gold. It deepens diplomatic ties in West Africa. It expands India's economic footprint in a region of growing global importance, and it reinforces India's image as a partner willing to engage on equal terms without imposing political conditions. In a world where access to resources increasingly shapes power, India is positioning itself carefully, building supply chains that are stable, diversified, and resilient. Viewed through this lens, the Burkina Faso Gold Agreement is not a one-off transaction. It is a deliberate step in India's long-term strategy to secure the resources needed for sustained growth and global influence. While no formal objection has been issued, the agreement has not gone unnoticed in Washington. According to diplomatic and policy observers, the India-Burkina Faso gold deal has caused quiet discomfort within U.S. strategic circles, not because it violates any rules, but because it signals a changing reality. For decades, Western governments and corporations have held significant influence over African resource markets. Control over extraction, financing, and trade routes often flowed through familiar Western institutions. That framework is now being tested. Analysts note that direct agreements like this one challenge long-standing assumptions about who shapes access to Africa's natural wealth. When African governments engage new partners on their own terms, traditional leverage begins to weaken. This concern is especially visible among commentators aligned with Trump-era foreign policy thinking, which emphasized competition with emerging powers and skepticism toward shifting alliances. From that perspective, the deal is viewed less as an isolated transaction and more as part of a broader erosion of U.S. influence in West Africa. The worry is not about India specifically, it is about precedent. If more African nations pursue similar partnerships, diversifying beyond Western channels, the balance of economic and political influence could continue to shift. At the same time, US officials have been careful to avoid public confrontation. Open opposition could reinforce perceptions that Washington resists African autonomy in resource management. Instead, the response has remained measured, watchful, strategic. Globally, the implications extend beyond one country or one deal. They point to a multipolar resource landscape where influence is negotiated, not assumed, where African nations have greater choice, and where emerging powers like India play a growing role. In this context, the deal is not a provocation. It is a signal that the rules of engagement in Africa are evolving, quietly but decisively. Experts say this agreement reflects something much larger than a single transaction. Across the continent, African nations are increasingly asserting control over their natural resources. They are re-examining old contracts, rethinking long-standing dependencies, and seeking partnerships that better align with national priorities. The era of automatic reliance on traditional Western allies is gradually giving way to a more diversified approach, one that includes emerging powers, regional cooperation, and direct state-to-state engagement. The India-Burkina Faso gold deal fits squarely within this broader global trend. For India, the agreement strengthens its footprint in Africa, not just as a buyer of resources, but as a long-term strategic partner. It reinforces India's role in a multipolar world where influence is built through trade, trust, and continuity. For Burkina Faso, the significance runs deeper. The deal represents a step toward greater economic autonomy, a move toward reclaiming agency over how national wealth is managed and monetized, and a signal that the country intends to shape its own economic future on its own terms. Together, these choices point to a shifting global balance. Power is no longer concentrated in a single direction. It is negotiated, shared, and increasingly influenced by the decisions of nations once considered peripheral. In that sense, this deal is not just about gold. It is about a world quietly reorganizing itself, one partnership at a time. While the full details of the agreement have not yet been made public, its significance is already evident. The India-Burkina Faso gold deal represents a clear shift in global resource diplomacy, one where African nations play a more decisive role in choosing partners and shaping outcomes, as countries across the continent explore similar paths. This agreement could serve as a reference point for future cooperation beyond traditional frameworks. Its long-term impact will unfold over time. We will continue to monitor the situation closely and bring updates as more information becomes available.